get my hands on you. So I want to take you back where I was about 14 years ago. I was a student at Johns Hopkins University, and I was ready to begin my life. I was planning to become an OBGYN. And my body, all of a sudden, went into total hormonal collapse. And as a result, so did my life. Totally dysfunctional. Couldn't get up, couldn't go to sleep, couldn't have any energy. It was a nonstop nightmare to wake up not recognizing yourself and not knowing how to live in the body that you had. I want you to picture me. I really do want you to look. I was 200 pounds. I know, right? Covered, face, chest, back, arms, anywhere that you could put, in painful cystic acne. It would take me half an hour in the morning of careful, uncomfortable application of makeup to try to go outside. I was depressed. I was exhausted. I would menstruate once a year, and nobody had any idea what was wrong with me. It had been getting progressively worse from about the age of 15. And I was getting progressively more curious and frustrated. And in one of my insomniacal moments, I was at the library, of course, science nerd, sexy scientist, I like to say, researching in one of the obstetrics journals. And I saw this small study on a disorder called Stein-Leventhal disorder. And it was named after the gentleman who categorized this grouping of symptoms. And I said, oh my God, I fit this description to a T. So I felt very naughty, but I ripped out the document. And the next morning, I very vigorously marched into my gynecologist's office without an appointment, of course. First thing in the morning, I'm like, hi. So I think I just figured out what's been wrong with me for the past 7 years, and I'd like a transvaginal ultrasound right now. And she looked at me. How do you know what that is? And I said, let's do this confirmatory test and let's see. So I said, I'm not leaving here until we do it. So we did it. And she said, oh, look at that. You do have polycystic ovarian syndrome, in fact. You were right. And being a now what solution kind of girl, I said, so now what? What do we do? Now I know what it is, finally. Now what? And she said, well, and I'll never forget sitting in that chair in her office, and she said, you have a future laid out ahead of you of obesity, diabetes, infertility, heart disease, and cancer. And we'll medicate you along the way, so don't worry. And I remember sitting in that chair, and it wasn't out of anger or a sense of victimhood, or there was no fight. It was just on a cellular level, my whole being said, no, thank you. And I said to her, thank you very much for your opinion. I'm going to go take my very expensively trained Hopkins mind and go figure this out. So that's what I did. And I apprenticed myself with all sorts of healers, and I was doing all sorts of fun experiments. I had turned orange from drinking so much carrot juice at one point. That was, my girlfriend at the time, she was like, she's still my best friend. She grabbed me and she said, you've turned orange, it's time to stop this experiment. I said, I gotta finish this experiment. None of these experiments made any change in my symptoms at all. And then about 10 years ago, what was coming to the forefront in nutritional science was this idea of nutritional genomics, that you could use food to manipulate gene expression. Oh my God, I was so turned on by this. I said, well, if that's possible, if food could decide, like in a set of twins, if a diet in the one twin could decide how her health was going to manifest versus her identical twin with a different diet, different issues. And what could I do with food to recalibrate my hormonal system? And that's when I dove into my research and studied functional medicine, opted out, freaked out my parents, did not become a doctor, and instead became a functional nutritionist, and developed this 5-step nutritional protocol that rebooted my entire endocrine system. As you can see, how glorious I look now. And opened my center in Midtown Manhattan 9 years ago and started treating other women with similar conditions, menstrual issues, fertility issues, low energy, low libido. And they'd come into my center limping with these issues, periods out of whack, couldn't get pregnant if they've tried 17 times, can't function, can't remember the last time when they thought about sex or pleasure or anything. And similarly, their lives were also untethered, uncentered. They didn't have their center point. And we'd apply the protocol, and their health issues would resolve themselves. Miraculous things for me as a scientist, like a woman without a period for 17 years. She'd have to go to the doctor once a year to be induced with progesterone to have a bleed. She would, after the, she menstruates monthly now, right? And we are close friends. I just find that whole story so fascinating. Another woman came in on birth control, on Prozac, in a job she hated, in a relationship she hated. We got her off all of these medications, of course, with the support of her doctor. And 6 months later, she wrote to me and she said, by the way, feeling great, that was a given, and she said, move to LA, and have gotten my first screenwriter job, and the show that I'm writing for is now being in syndication. Love that. Another woman had 2 businesses, had all sorts of things going on in her life, private Pilates clients in New York, very fancy, had her own studio in Greenwich, Connecticut. Husband was in transition in his career, and she was having erratic cycles. She's in her mid-30s. We applied the protocol to her body, and effortlessly, this is the part that I kind of got excited about, effortlessly, as her body restored itself, it was like, remember that game, Connect 4? I love that game. Anyway, I used to play that all the time with my brothers. So, her whole life just started lining up. She effortlessly let go of these clients in New York, allowed one of her partners at the studio to take on more responsibility, and she realized that she had been putting off having a child for far too long and was able to conceive naturally as a result of the work, which was so exciting to see. And of course, being someone who's interested in biology, I loved the idea that she was healing herself of these symptoms, all of these women. But the bigger discovery was that if a woman, right, is in line, in alignment, in harmony with that internal ecosystem that she has, that begins to impregnate the ecology of her entire life, right? With this idea of transformation. Your body is a change agent. And then that can start to affect the rest of your life. And that was so, so exciting. And that's when I fell in love. I said, oh my God, here we are walking around with these blueprints in our bodies that tell us how to live and work in a way that's in the flow of our bodies. And if we can become fluent in the language of our biochemistry and our physiology, this grouping of glands and organs that I like to call lady parts, that we can have access to an infinite source of energy and vitality and clarity and unwavering purpose. I mean, I was totally hooked. So, Aldous Huxley once said that man is an intelligence merely in servitude to his organs, and I thought that's sad, that we look at being in our bodies as this sort of slavery-based trap that we have to deal with. And I've really instead found that women who get into partnership with their bodies end up becoming the fullest expression of themselves and living as leaders and change agents in their lives and communities. So let me introduce you to your lady parts. I just can't help myself. If I'm on stage, I got to talk about lady parts, I'm going to tell you about them. I want you to at least go home knowing what they are. Nothing else. So there are 2 things I want you to know. First is the physiological structure in your body, called the endocrine system. 6 glands. Hypothalamus in the midbrain, pituitary gland nestled close by, thyroid here, pancreas here, adrenals here, ovaries here. They work in an interconnected way, making sure that your body has what it needs to function. Brain, heart, muscle tissue, hormones, right? Fascinating. And they're so highly sensitive. The hypothalamus works with this thing called negative biofeedback. So anytime something happens, the temperature changes outside. Hypothalamus picks that up, pituitary gland sends a message to the thyroid. All of a sudden, you are adjusting to the temperature. You didn't have to do a thing. You were merely enjoying the weather. Love that. Genius. Only in a body could that happen. Anyway, then there's this physiological structure. Your hormonal ratios. You have 4 of them that happen in a 1-month cycle. And it's really interesting because we only ever reference that in a very basic way, like, I want to get pregnant or I don't want to get pregnant, right? That's how we reference these hormonal ratios, right? The ovulation one is kind of the most famous, and the period, the menstrual part's the most infamous. But there are 4. There are a couple others. So I want you to start to think about, where are you in that cycle? And here are the 4 phases. So first you have the follicular phase, fascinating phase. And neurochemically, these hormonal ratios change your brain chemistry, right? So you are a different person week over week within the month. Yeah, you know. Yeah. In that follicular phase, where the eggs are kind of coming up to maturity, one is going to make it to the fallopian tube. It's a very exciting time. Neurochemically speaking, you have the most access to creative energy that you will have the entire month. Effortlessly. This is a perfect time to begin new projects. Mastermind, plan, dream big, all of that. In the ovulatory phase, which we all know very well, so I'm not going to dive into it, in the ovulatory phase, we have the best communication skills and the most energy that we're going to have all month. This is definitely a time to have important conversations. Like, wouldn't it be genius if you could plan to ask for a raise when you're ovulating? Please, whoever's trying to not give you the money to be like, please take the money. You're so irresistible. Or go on a first date, or have an important conversation with your partner, or tell your mother something that you really want her to say yes to. You're just a magnet at that time. In the luteal phase, B vitamins are being called into action because the lining is thickening, and this is a very energized process. But we become very detail-oriented at this time. So that shoe closet you couldn't get to organize before, this is the week. Detail-oriented tasks, very easy to do. Try not to plan them in the other 2 weeks. In the 4th phase, the menstrual phase, this is the time of the month where you actually have the most conversation between the right hemisphere and the left hemisphere of the brain. So amazing. So if you're looking to course correct, evaluate your life in the past 30 days. How'd you do this month? This would be the time to do it. You're most able to receive those gut feeling body messages. So take notice, take a moment to take notice at that time. Gloria Steinem said when she was talking about the movie Misrepresentation, which I loved, she said, girls are taught to view their bodies as unending projects to work on, whereas boys from a young age are taught to view their bodies as tools to master their environment. I literally fell off my chair when I heard her say that, because isn't that the truth? We as women get on these hamster wheels of self-improvement and self-sabotage, and we don't learn about these important, real physical structures in our bodies that give us this blueprint to how to organize our lives. I mean, if you actually adhere to the map, you learn exactly what you should eat, when you should eat it, how you should move your body, how you should organize social commitments, work priorities. It's all laid out for you. You don't have to really think or do or push or struggle. It's just there for you. And unfortunately, the environment is a little bit mastering us right now, right? Women's bodies are in hormonal breakdown in epidemic proportions. And we are, I think it's 20 million women in the United States suffer from, endometriosis, fibroids, PCOS. In 2009, $1.42 billion was spent on infertility treatments. Rates of idiopathic, no known cause infertility are on the rise in both men and women. Cancers of the reproductive organs are on the rise in men and women. Drugs are being prescribed left and right for treatment of things that don't really need medication, but really need a systemic approach. And it's also interesting because we're also in a very equally interesting historical moment where we have the most power economically and as the largest consumer demographic than we've ever had before. You can literally vote with your dollars to say to corporate America, hey, I'd like you to custom fit an environment for me. Like, I'd love to see more maternal care there. So at Flow Living, we at the center, we want to empower as many women as we can to learn this language and leverage their bodies as a tool. So I want to give you the 3 things that we teach everybody. The first is you've got to fall in love. You've got to learn what these parts do and how to eat to support them so that they can function optimally for you. The second thing is you need to commit to this new relationship with your body, right? I want you to plan your month thematically, week over week, in accordance with these hormonal ratios so that you can just do more, cross-train your life. I call it embodied time management. The third thing is I want you to start to leverage your body as a power tool. And I want you to answer the question that none of my patients can ever answer the first time I ask it of them, which is, if I were to wave a magic wand and restore your body to perfect vitality, what would you do with that energy? How would you be a change agent in the world? If you can begin to answer that question, then we can really step into our roles as leaders, as women. So, women give birth through the body. The biggest act of our generation of women is going to be in partnership with the body, to not leave it out. And I really want to see you love your lady parts, transform your life, and change the world. I'm Alisa Vitti. It's been an honor.